Lesson 8, the Heroic Age, the 11th century BCE. The Southern Levant. We need to summarize conditions at the beginning of the 11th century. The Canaanites continued to dwell in the northern valleys and plains. The Philistines lived in the southern coastal plains, and the tribes of Israel were in the hill country. The tribes had not been able to drive out the Canaanites and Amorites because they had iron chariots. Archaeological surveys indicate the arrival of pastoralists who settled along the fringes of the steppe-land. They expanded and established settlements in the areas of mixed agriculture. They developed terraces and planted vineyards and orchards. The country was relatively uninhabited, providing a refuge for Apiru outlaws and Shasu pastoralists. The southern tribes. Verses 1 through 8 tells a strange story of a king named Adoni-Bezek. It seems that Judah is continuing the conquest and has been chosen to go against the Canaanites. In the battle, Judah killed 10,000 men at Bezek. They captured the king and learned that he had cut off the thumb and big toes of 70 kings he had captured. They took Adoni-Bezek to Jerusalem, conquered the city, and burned it. Perhaps Adoni-Bezek was the ruler of the city. The capture of Hebron and Debir is again mentioned. The former name of Debir is given as Kiryat Sefer. The name of Moses' father-in-law, Hobab, has been omitted from the text in verse 16, but is supplied by the Septuagint. Several places are mentioned that were not taken by Manasseh, Ephraim, Zebulun, and Dan, among others. The book of Judges is a political treatise with strong religious overtones. The last statement of the book is, "In those days there was no king in Israel. Every man was doing what was right in his own eyes." We will focus our attention on the individuals highlighted in the book itself. The judges were charismatic personalities who came forward as saviors of the people under the influence of an inner compulsion to accomplish a particular task. Othniel, son of Kenaz, was a Kenizzite. Was the enemy Hurrian, Kassite? Some connect Cush-Rishathaim with the Syrian ruler during the Egyptian period of interregnum. Othniel took Debir at Kiryat Sefer and received the daughter of Caleb as a prize. His conflict with Cush and Rishathaim is shrouded in mystery from the standpoint of historical geography. Ehud, son of Gera, a Benjamite, killed Eglon, king of Moab, at the city of Palms. It's probably Jericho. Gilgal, Syria, which is unknown, and the hills of Ephraim, and the fords of the Jordan all play a real part in this story. The drama of this action seemed to be connected to the tribal name, which means son of the right hand. Ehud is left-handed and ambidextrous and can hide his weapon on his right thigh. When Ehud had escaped, he summons the tribal unit, the hill country of Ephraim, which includes the territory of Benjamin, Ephraim, and Manasseh. By blocking the fords across the Jordan, he killed many Moabites and freed Israel from Moabite power. Shamgar, son of Anat, fought against the Philistines. He killed 600 Philistines with an ox goad, an instrument used to prod animals. His name is Hurrian. Anat is the warrior huntress goddess of Northwest Semitic tradition. Deborah and Barak. Jabin was king in Hatzor. His general Sisera lived in Harosheth Hagoyim, Galilee of the Gentiles. Hatzor was burned with fire and its king killed. The same city had oppressed the Israelites for 20 years. Deborah, the prophetess, wife of Lapidothim, was judging Israel at the time under the palm tree between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. Her influence was widespread, and she could take care of the emergency. This conflict is told in a prose version in chapter 4 and a poetic version in chapter 5. To compare the two versions is extremely helpful. Deborah summoned Barak and told him to gather 10,000 men from Zebulun and Naphtali and lead them to Mount Tabor. He insisted that she go with him. She consented, but told him a woman would get credit for the victory. Sisera had 900 chariots fitted with iron. The river Kishon drains all the water that falls in the valley. The poem version tells us that God fought for Israel and the heavens poured down rain. The chariots could not maneuver in the mud and were quickly defeated by the lightly armed soldiers of Barak. Now Heber the Kenite had left the other Kenites, the descendants of Hobab, Moses' brother-in-law, and pitched his tent by the great tree of Zananim near Kadesh. Sisera fled on foot and took refuge in the tent of Yael because there was an alliance between Jabin, king of Hatzor, and the family of Heber the Kenite. He asked for water, and she gave him milk. But Yael, Heber's wife, picked up a tent peg and hammer and went quickly to him while he lay fast asleep, exhausted. She drove the peg through his temple into the ground, and Sisera died. Rainey makes an interesting comment. The death of Sisera, who had sought refuge at the holy shrine maintained by Heber and Yael, is the classic story of a heroic woman who recognized that the death of a tyrant took precedence over the usual rules of sanctuary and hospitality. Gideon, son of Joash, of the tribe of Manasseh, of the family of Abiezer, known from Samaria Ostragas as being in the Manasseh area. He fought against Midian in the valley of Jezreel. This narrative describes a phenomenon that occurred many times in the Middle East of camel nomads who oppressed the agricultural villagers by coming in and forcefully taking their crops. The Midianites had been doing this for years. The text tells us that they invaded the land to ravage it. The reference to the Gaza area is linked to the Amalekites who invaded from the south. The crops, sheep, cattle, and donkeys were all taken. The hometown of Gideon was Ophrah. This was a cultic center where Baalism was intertwined with Yahwism. The victory allowed the people to turn away from Baalism. The assembly of the warriors by Gideon took place at the spring of Hehood, traditionally the spring that flows today at Hehood on the opposite side of the valley from the enemy encampments. From there, the Midianites would not have seen the camp of the peasant warriors. We need to emphasize the careful preparation God used with Gideon to confirm that he was with him. There is first the acceptance of the offering in chapter 6, verses 20-21. The reverse miracle of the fleece, chapter 7, 37-40. Then the overhearing of the dream in chapter 7, verses 13 and 14. Warriors from Naphtali, Asher, and Manasseh joined in the pursuit, and Ephraimites seized the fords across the Jordan. They captured 2 of the Midianite leaders. The punishment of the elders of Sukkot and Peniel, because they did not support Gibeon's soldiers, is illustrative of the age of violence and enmity that prevailed. Under Gideon's auspices, Ophrah, in the center of Jezreel Valley, became a tribal cultic center. His son Abimelech made the first attempt at establishing an Israelite monarchy. Abimelech was the son of Gideon by a Shechemite woman. He persuaded the elders of Shechem to make him their king in the manner of the Canaanite city rulers. Abimelech then slaughtered his 70 siblings. Only Jotham, the youngest brother, survived. Jotham climbed to the top of Mount Gerizim. He told a fable about the trees trying to find a ruler. Eventually, there was a problem between Shechem and Abimelech that fulfilled what Jotham had predicted. More hero stories. Tola, son of Puah. The author may not have had the proper information to fill in the details for this judge. He was from Issachar, but lived in Mount Ephraim. He was buried in Shamir in the hill country of Ephraim. Could this be equal to Samaria? Note that an earlier town was found there by the excavators. Yair of Gilead. He had 30 sons who rode 30 donkeys. They controlled 30 towns. He was buried in Kamon, a place not identified. Jephthah, son of Gilead. He was from the nobility, since his father was Gilead, but his mother was a harlot. He was an outcast who gathered a group of men and lived in Tov, identified as Et Tayyebe. Jephthah had become like the Apiru. The actual account of his battle with the Ammonites is prefaced by a long explanation of what was Israel's problem. They had left God and served other gods, the Baals, the Asherahs, the gods of Aram, Moab, Ammonites, and the Philistines. Israel had been crushed by their enemies. Jephthah argued with the Ammonites and then went to war. The battle was fought over an extensive area, evidently to the west of the Ammonite territory. Jephthah was victorious in battle, but tragically he sacrificed his own daughter as a result of a hasty, ill-advised vow. Jephthah fought the tribe of Ephraim when a dispute arose over Jephthah's failure to call them to arms against the Ammonites. 42,000 Ephraimites were slaughtered. This is also where a dialectical distinction between the seen and sheen cost many lives. That was where they asked them to say shibboleth, but they could not say that, instead said sibboleth. Many cities are mentioned in the story. The Ammonites encamped in Gilead, Israelites at Ramoth Mizpah. Mizpah was a cultic center, perhaps an ancient Amphictyonic rallying point in Gilead. Gilead was used exclusively in place of Gad. Jephthah was buried in his town of Zaphon. Then we have three minor judges. Ibzan of Bethlehem, a clan leader, who is probably from the Galilean Bethlehem, not the Bethlehem we usually think of in Judah. Elon was from Zebulun. The only comment in his is his burial place, probably Elon, a major clan in the tribe of Zebulun. Abden, son of Hillel, from Ephraim. Only his status as patriarch of a great clan is mentioned. He was buried at Pirathon in the hill country of the Amalekites. Why a hill region in the land of Ephraim was called Amalekite is unknown. Samson is the final judge in this series that concludes the circle of narratives about charismatic leaders in the pre-monarchic period. It has all the features we would expect about a divinely chosen deliverer, announcement of his birth to a woman who was previously barren, prediction of his lifestyle, that was to be a Nazirite from birth, and he was not to cut his hair. These restrictions were also put upon his mother while she was pregnant. His birth was announced by an angel. The enemy were the Philistines, who had established themselves as the dominant power in the southern coastal region. This dominance probably meant that much of the agricultural produce of the area was extorted by the Philistines. Samson lived in Mahanadan between Zorah and Eshtaol. His family was from the part of the tribe that had not earlier migrated to the north. Zorah is located on the ridge bounded by the Sorek stream on the north. Opposite Bet Shemesh, which is on the south side of the wadi, Mahanadan was used as a camping ground for the tribe before they moved north. Zorah was on top of the ridge. Timnah was below in the valley. Samson saw a woman that he wanted for a wife. He asked his father to arrange the marriage. In the process, Samson killed a lion, which provided his riddle. Samson ate honey from the lion's carcass, which was unclean food for Samson, and which he should have avoided. He journeyed to Ashkelon on the coast to obtain the clothes to pay his debt. His withdrawal to the cave of the rock of Edom is a mystery. Is it the Edom east of the watershed south of Bethlehem, or the Edom that belonged to the Simeonites, which must have been in the southern Shephelah, or the very northern side of the Negev? Apparently, Samson was buried between Zorah and Eshtaol in the tomb of Manoah, his father. Then we have two appendices. The first is Judges 17 and 18, and it is the story of Micah's family and the migration of the Danites. Micah had stolen 1,100 shekels of silver from his mother. When she pronounced a curse over the thief, he confessed his guilt. She immediately uttered a blessing to counteract the curse. Then she took 200 shekels to a silversmith to make an image clad with silver. Micah took the image, made an ephod and some idols, and installed one of his sons as priest. A Levite from Bethlehem came looking for employment, and Micah gave him the charge of the shrine. The tribe of Dan was looking for some territory in which to settle. They sent 5 men from Zorah and Eshtaol to locate such a place. They entered the hill country of Ephraim, came to Micah's house, recognized the dialect of the Levite, and asked him about their prospects. He gave a favorable reply, and then they located Laish. The 5 men returned home, gave a positive report, and suggested they attack Laish. On the way, they stopped at Micah's house. They confiscated the shrine and ran off with his priest. Micah was not able to stop them, since they had 600 armed men. There was no one to rescue Laish. It was a long way from Sidon, and they had no relationship with anyone else. The Danites attacked them, rebuilt the city, and called it Dan. The city was in a valley near Beth Rehob. The Danites set up for themselves the idol, and Jonathan, the son of Moses, and his sons were priests for the tribe of Dan. The second dependency is the Levite and his concubine. They're the subject of Judges 19 and 20. A Levite who lived in a remote area in the hill country of Ephraim had a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. She was unfaithful and returned to her father. After 4 months, the Levite went to Bethlehem to persuade her to return. The Levite found it difficult to get away, but finally left late on the 5th day. They passed Jebus late in the day, but did not stop because it was not Israelite. They traveled on until they came to Gibeah in Benjamin, but no one took them in for the night. An old man from the hill country of Ephraim, who was living in Gibeah, came in from his work, and they went to his house. While they were enjoying themselves, some of the wicked men of the city surrounded the house. Pounding on the door, they shouted to the old man who owned the house, "Bring out the man who came to your house, so we can have sex with him." The concubine was sent out to them, and they raped her and abused her throughout the night, and at dawn they let her go. The next morning her husband found her dead at the door. He cut her into pieces and sent the pieces throughout Israel. The tribes assembled at Mizpah, Tel and Nizbeh. The tribes demanded Benjamin hand over the guilty men, but they refused. Israel fought against Benjamin twice and were defeated. Then they went to Bethel, which is a cultic center like Mizpah, where oaths can be taken and oracles can be sought. The strategy of the battle and the tactics of the feigned retreat and ambush must have been a common theme and may even have been a prominent practice in the local conflicts of that time. Only 400 men remained alive from Benjamin after the third encounter. The theme of preventing a tribe from being entirely wiped out is reflected in the brutal measures taken to provide wives for the surviving Benjamin warriors. The city of Jabesh Gilead was ravaged for not taking part in the general muster, and their virgins are spared and given to the Benjamites. The kidnapping of women from Shiloh provides one of the rare examples of specific geographical description. Behold, there is a feast of Yahweh in Shiloh from year to year, which is south of Bethel, to the east of the highway that goes up from Bethel to Shechem, and south of Lebonah. Now we need a little bit of background of why events happened as they did in this period. There is the story of Wenamon. Wenamon was a priest from Egypt who was sent north to obtain wood for the building of a boat for the god Amun-Re. He came to the city of Dor, which is a coastal city, and there was a fleet there with a TKR. This is known as the Sea Fleet of Teker. There was no Egyptian rule in Canaan at this time, which means that Egypt was weak. Wenamon had to pay cash for the wood. Unfortunately, his cash was stolen by one of his crew members, and he was not able to get it back. But then he went to Dor, and he took one of the fleets of the enemy and used that to bargain for the lost money. We assume that he was successful, but the story ends there. Now we'll talk about the Philistines, since they are an important group at this time. The tradition was that people from Caphtor came and ravaged the land of the Avim in Deuteronomy 2:23. And as for the Avites who lived in villages as far as Gaza, the Caphtorites coming out from Caphtor destroyed them and settled in their place. Then in Joshua 13:3, from the Shihor River on the east of Egypt to the territory of Ekron on the north, all of it counted as Canaanite, the territory of the 5 Philistine rulers in Gaza, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gath, and Ekron. Note that there were Philistines at Gerar in the patriarchal narratives. And note that they are called peoples of the sea. In the Amarna tablets, they are called Lucians and Sardani. Ramses III great inscription at Medinet Habu shows pictures of 2 attacks, by land and by sea. Since Sardini were on the Egyptian side in the land battle, we realize that Ramses had hired them as mercenaries, a part of his troops. The sea battle shows 5 enemy boats and 5 types of helmet or headdress. They marched toward Egypt with fire prepared before them. Now, you tell the type of sea people they were by the type of helmet that they wore. Each was distinct. In Palestine, we have a king and 5 tyrants. The Philistine authority extended as far as the valley of Jezreel during Saul's reign. The Philistines occupied the coastal region of Palestine from the Yarkon southward. We know of the battles that took place with Jonathan when he went against them during the time of Saul, and some of the battles that Saul fought against the Philistines. Now we have these 5 coastal cities. We have Gaza. It's known from many Egyptian sources. It was an important Egyptian center. Ashkelon is the same. It was an Egyptian center. Ashdod, texts come from Ugarit. It was a seaport from which wood, fabrics, wool, fish, and other products were exported. Ekron is 3.5 miles west of Tel Barasi. It is Timnah. It's south of the Wadi Ara, the Sorek. It occupies 40 acres. The location of Gath has been debated. Tel Sheikh El Areni has been discredited. Tel En Negelah, probably a Hyksos town. Tel El Hetzi is probably Eglon. David also had Philistines as his bodyguards. And we ask, why did one group give its name to all of the region, and especially to all of the sea people settled in Palestine? Perhaps they were Philistines in the land earlier, as we mentioned, at Gerar, and they absorbed the new settlers. The Hebrews would not distinguish between various types of sea peoples if one of them was dominant. Then we have an encounter with Israel. The Philistines were originally in control of the coastal plain, Dor and Beit Shan. Aphek, at the sources of the Yarkon, seems to have become a northern border town. They assembled here for military campaigns in the north and northwest. The cultural impact of the Philistines was only felt for a few generations. They were a dominant factor for 150 years. They had excellent military organization, well-perfected fighting methods, and superior equipment. Samson represents the earliest conflict of interest. You notice that the Philistines controlled Israel at this time, yet Samson was a thorn in the side to the Philistines. And we have Judah, Hezron, Caleb, Shobal, Kiryat Yarim, the Ithrites, Shumathites, and Mishrites. From these descended the Zorathites and the Eshtolites, that is Zorah and Eshtaol, and these were part of the tribe of Dan. The border lay between Timnah and Zorah. A decisive battle for control of the Shephelah took place when Saul was king in Judah. This is when David was not allowed to go with the Philistines and returned to Ziklag. Israel was defeated, and the Philistines took over much of that territory. The ark was captured. They sent it to Ashdod, then to Gath, then to Ekron, and then they returned it to Israel at Beit Shemesh. And when some of the people looked into the ark and were killed, they sent it on to Kiryat Yarim. Now Samuel's leadership was effective for a little while. He gathered the people at Mizpah. The Philistines attacked Israel, but Samuel prayed for the people. The Lord thundered and defeated the Philistines. And then the Israelites pursued the Philistines from Mizpah to Beth-kar. And then the towns from Ekron to Gath were restored to Israel. So that is a little bit about the history that took place in this period.